the pain of paying. The pain of paying. So imagine that tonight you go to dinner. It's an expensive dinner. It's $200, and you can pay with cash or with credit card. Which one would feel worse?
Today's guest is Dan Ariely, and an explosion that burned over 75% of Dan's body was the catalyst for him to become a world leader in behavioral economics, which is combining economics and psychology to understand why people behave the way that they do. What if you could make better decisions that would impact your life immediately? You may think you know what's best for you, but the data says you're not as rational as you think you are. Dan is one of the best analytical minds I've spoken to this year so far. You will walk away from this podcast with some ideas that will challenge your normal way of doing things. Enjoy the podcast.
The Way of Will John.
Guys, what's up? We're back. And as is, of course, customary here on The Way of Will John, we have a very, very interesting guest, Dan, who I should have, just before we started, I should have asked how to pronounce your last name properly. So I'm going to let you do that.
You don't want to get it wrong? Go ahead. Okay. So I grew up in Israel. So in Hebrew, it is Ariely. Very hard to pronounce. Ariely is easier in English. I do get O'Reilly when I go to Ireland.
That makes sense.
But I've developed indifference for how people. I don't take any offense with how people pronounce it, and Dan works just as well.
That's cool. I mean, we have a language channel, and Hebrew is not one of the languages that I have touched yet. Even though I've been to Israel just once, it was I had a great time there. But okay, getting straight into it, you have a very interesting, unique profession, job, I guess to say. It's something that you've carved out, because I've not known anything about, let's say, behavior economics. I've not known anything about the books that they've written. You know, the subject is kind of foreign to me. And so I got right here something that this may have been pulled from your website. It might have been pulled from one of your books, but I'm going to read this, and then you can go ahead and give us a more or less a rundown on what behavior economics is and kind of what you're doing. So I'm reading a quote here. It says, "I became engrossed with the idea that we repeatedly and predictably make the wrong decisions in many aspects of our lives, and that research could help change some of these patterns." So right off the bat, you're telling me I don't know me? I don't know what I'm doing?
Yes.
Is that correct? That's okay. Why?
That's the issue. And so maybe because we were both on video and audio, maybe I should say something about my half a beard first.
Okay, go for it.
Which, of course, it's not an aesthetic choice, but I was badly burned many years ago. Most of my body, 70%, is covered with scars, including the right side of my face. So the beard happened, just because there's no hair on this side. But I'll tell you the story of this beard, and it will also help you understand what I mean, but we don't know ourselves. So for many years, I shaved. And when I shaved, I became less non-symmetrical, right? It was a little harder to, now it's very obvious, but, and I also used to walk with shirts with long sleeves and all kinds of things to hide my non-symmetry. And then a few years ago, I went on a month-long hike, didn't shave for a month, and came out a little bit more messy than this, but came out something like this. And I didn't plan on keeping the half a beard. I didn't want to draw attention to myself. I've been practicing for years to try and hide my scars. But I decided to keep it for just 2 or 3 more weeks as like a memento from the hike. The first time I took such a long hike in my life. In my life. So I kept it. And what was really odd and unexpected to me was that I got emails from people who thanked me for the half a beard. And why did they thank me for it? These were people with different injuries that were, like me, practiced a lot hiding their injuries. And they thought that I was being upfront of it in purpose. I wasn't, but they thought I was trying to say, hey, look how much I don't care. So I decided to keep the beard as a public service, the half a beard as a public service announcement. I said, if it helps people to come to terms and maybe be a bit less bashful, maybe it's a good thing. But here's the point to your question. a few months into it, I realized that this half a beard changed me. And it basically got me to accept my own injury. I started working more with short sleeve shirts. I basically said, this is just me. I'm not hiding it. And in retrospect, standing in front of a mirror and trying to be less non-symmetrical is an act for the outside world, but it's also an act for the inside world. It's an act of saying, I don't want to be seen. I'm a bit bashful. I want this to be hidden. And stopping that actually started getting me to think about my scars as the journey of my life. Not all a happy journey, but part of me in a deep way. So what I mean by the fact that we don't know ourselves is that we just don't know how we would react in different circumstances. But the extent to which we don't know ourselves is very broad. And I would suggest that you don't know how to maximize your sleep. I would suggest that you don't know how to use your money to maximize your well-being. I would suggest that you don't know the best ways to make friends, have relationships. The list goes on and on. And the answer is life is really complex. And, if you think about where good intuition comes from, so you're a soccer player. I prefer the word football, not soccer, but
that's fine. Yeah.
But you're a soccer player, and by playing so many years, you've developed the intuition. You see the players on the field, and you have a sense of what you should do next. Like a chess player sees the chessboard, and they don't need to analyze everything specifically. You have an intuition, or you can kick the ball, and you can get a sense of where is it going because you've done it many thousands of times, and you have feedback and so on. Most of life is not like that. Most of life, you don't have good feedback. You don't do things thousands of times. Right? How many people have you dated? Imagine you said, oh, I dated. Imagine you kicked a ball the same number of times you dated people. How well would you develop your intuition? Not so well. So modern life is complex and interesting and intricate and not built around our cognitive evolutionary skills. So our intuitions drive us into wrong decisions all the time.
So because of that, I mean, and I find that interesting too, obviously, the arrival of intuition in football and let's say in something else that I do consistently and constantly, from training to the language space, where I know now on my, what would be my 10th language, where I should start, how I should start. Many hours have been spent doing that. This is a more philosophical question, but a lot of people, when they find out that I speak a number of languages, will generally come and say that I have a gift. They'll generally say that the gift of language is mine. And for a person who has, all these people were never there for the hours spent struggling, stumbling around, sounding like a baby in all those languages. They're not there for that, right? So, and it does make me question whether or not there is some sort of gift. There is some sort of something there, maybe a proclivity towards language learning, possibly.
In general, you need both. In general, people vary on their natural giftness for language, but it doesn't mean that there are people who can do it without hard work. And we're wired differently. Some people are better in math. Some people have higher empathy. Some people are better in languages. But it's not deterministic. It's not as if that if you were wired for math, you would be a mathematician. No, it depends on where you grew up and what opportunities you got and was it developed at a young age. So there's lots of elements around it. But there's another question in what you're asking that I don't know the answer to, but I'm curious about, which is what do people appreciate more? Natural skill or hard work? So imagine
That's a great question.
Imagine you see somebody performing on stage, a musician. What would you appreciate more if you said, my goodness, they're effortless. They come on stage and they improvise. They made this song especially for us. It's the first time they're singing it. No practice, no this. They're just amazing. Just natural skill. Or would you say this person is playing a really hard? It's really hard. It took them 10,000 hours just to get to that. And I'm sure that the answer is for both. But I think that people appreciate more. I don't think for the right reason, but I think we appreciate more natural skill than hard work. Now, I don't have evidence for this, so I'm just speculating. But so I speculate that people appreciate more natural skill, but I also think it's because they think the natural skill projects more on the person, like a halo. So let's take a comedian. A comedian that comes and tells jokes and we feel that they just made them on the spot. We say, oh, this person must be incredibly bright and quick and they understand people. And, we have this basket of things that we think that they're good at. On the other hand, if we felt that they're just honing that one joke for a very long time, we would not be able to expand our scope of inference about them. And therefore, we prefer the model that says that things are effortless.
Yeah. And it's a strange thing. And I think I tend to agree with that. And when we look at it from a football standpoint, when people, as they do unnecessarily, compare Messi and Ronaldo, the tendency is to give Messi a more natural gift and Ronaldo one of hard work. And not that there was no natural ability, obviously, in Cristiano Ronaldo, but that it appears that Messi is effortless. My take on that would probably be the fact that because when we feel there's some sort of divine presence that we like to attribute to the people who have a natural gift, and therefore it becomes better. If you say, even though it's clear that not everybody would work 10,000 hours to do something, somehow logically everyone, if I had 10,000 free hours, I could also be a professor at Duke and do this and that. I could for sure, everyone has that belief. I'd be in the NBA, if I wanted, because, and so there's that. But I'm curious because you mentioned, and this is going to throw us completely to another side of the subject.
You mentioned Brazilian, Argentinian soccer. Can I tell you a little story on that?
Oh, please. Yeah, go ahead.
So I don't watch much sport in general. I like going to a stadium to watch basketball, Duke or UNC, but I don't go to games. But quite a few years ago, I went to give a talk to some VC fund in San Francisco. And on the way there, I asked myself, why am I going? Why did I agree to do that? But I go, I give my talk over dinner. I finish my talk, I sit in the table, I listen to somebody else. The guy on my right is saying, how can I get you to come to Brazil to talk to my company? So I say, the World Cup is coming, get me tickets to the final 4 games. I'll be there. A week later, I have tickets. And I land in Brazil the night before my first game, and it's Germany versus Brazil. I don't know if you remember that game.
Oh, God, come on.
And as somebody interested in social science, it was fascinating. I was sitting, of course, in the Brazilian side, and the shock and the depression were really interesting. But the other thing that was interesting was that I stayed in the stadium about an hour after the game, and lots of people stayed. And I felt it was like a funeral, that as long as people are still by the gravesite, it's still, the person is still part, and people felt like they're still in the World Cup as long as they were still in the stadium. But the sadness was was very, like the deep sadness was very palatable. And then the other thing that was fascinating was the final game, which was between Argentina and Germany. And of course, the Brazilians really were anti-Argentinian for all kinds of reasons. But as the game was moving on, they couldn't really cheer for Germany. There were two very different types of games. The German approach to the game, the South American approach for the game. And you could see screams of delight escaping, even for Argentina, from time to time, just because it was very hard for them to cheer for the German type. So even though they were more against Argentina, it was very hard for them to cheer against that. So the social element of that was just fascinating.
Totally. I mean, it was insane. I mean, to be honest, I don't know how much you followed along that tournament, but it was clear to most fans that Brazil was just skirting by all the time there. And that when you go back and really look at it, that this train wreck, was possible. Yeah. 7-1. Wow. But still something where, they're not going to make it all the way just like this. Yeah. Really interesting.
In Brazil, there's an expression called the Brazilian way. Mm-hmm. And the expression of the Brazilian way is kind of getting by on your wits. You're not working too hard, you're not doing things as you should be, but you're talented enough with raw talent that you get by. And the feeling was that against the Germans, the Brazilian way is not the way to go.
Minutes match. Yeah. Definitely. Okay. Well, yeah, what I was going to say and where I was going to throw it is something that's interesting, I think, for not just for young people. I mean, it's for everybody in general. But you mentioned the relationship that people are going to have with money and how we can have an incorrect maybe view of that. What more specifically and, logically can we throw this into our lives right now? Should I go get a lottery ticket, or is that what are you going to tell me?
No, I don't think it's about. First of all, don't get the lottery ticket. But the thing with money is that money. We can talk a lot about money, but we're not naturally designed to think about money. Money is all about opportunity. If you go ahead and you buy coffee, there will be something else that you would not be able to buy. But it's very hard.
Is that true though? Is that true? Really? Yeah. I mean, I'm a billionaire now. I can buy coffee until whatever. So, then what?
Even if you're a billionaire, the moment you spend an amount of money, it comes from somewhere. Maybe your kid's inheritance. By the way, there are very few billionaires. I'm happy that you are one of them. But for most people, the opportunity cost is more palatable. But there are some people that it's only about the inheritance for their kids. But a few years ago, I went to a Toyota dealership, and there were people who were going to buy a new car, and I asked them, if you're going to buy this new car, what would you not be able to do? Like, what are you giving up? Right? And, the people in billionaires don't buy Toyotas. Let's just assume that. So these were people who something is going to give. Something is going to give. But when I asked them what is going to give, nobody gave me an answer because they never thought about it. And then I pushed them and I said, look, you're going to spend a lot of money on the car. The money will come from somewhere. Where would it come from? The most common answer I got was, if I buy a Toyota, I can't get a Honda, which of course is true, but it's not the kind of answer I wanted. I wanted to get an answer that says, this would cost me a week of vacation a year for the next 7 years, and 70 books and 300 lattes, and we're not going to do night out in the movies. Somewhere would go. But the reality is that it's very hard to figure that out. And modern technology is making it hard to understand the consequences of our financial actions. I want to buy a new bicycle. If I buy a new bicycle, what would I not be able to do? Very, very hard. Now, if I gave you every morning $100 and I said, this is your money for today, opportunity cost would be very clear. You would understand that if you have a big breakfast and take a Uber to work, you might not have money for dinner or for medication. If I give you the money for a month and I give you student loans and I give you car payments and I give you retirement plans, now this relationship between what I'm spending and what would give up gets really, really fuzzy. So the point about money is that to think about money the right way, we should ask ourselves, what are other ways to spend this money? Before I go and buy my bicycle, I should say, is there a better way to spend this money? Is there something that would get me more happiness than this money, now or later, right? Maybe I should save it and in 20 years buy, I don't know, a scooter. But thinking about money is very tough. So we come up with all kinds of shortcuts to think about money, and those shortcuts are not good for us. I'll give you two examples of shortcuts. One example is something called
cash.
That's right. And why? Why would the cash feel so much worse?
I mean, we would assume it's because I have it now. It's tangible. Anything that's tangible, you take it away from me.
That's right.
I hate it.
With a credit card, you don't feel that you're giving it up. You're just signing. It will happen later. In fact, with the pain of paying, we can make things worse. Imagine that I own the restaurant and I figured out that people eat 200 bites and pay $200. And I said it because I like you so much, I'll give you a discount. For you, only 50 cents per bite, and I'll only charge you for the bites you eat. I'll serve you your dish, I'll sit next, and I'll take a note, and every time you take a bite, I'll mark a little V on my notepad, charging you 50 cents for every bite you take. I promise you it will be a very cheap but very unpleasant meal. When I teach my students about the psychology of money, I sometimes bring pizza and I charge them 25 cents per bite. Mm-hmm. And what do you think happens? Huge bites. And they take such huge bites that they don't end up enjoying anything. Right? So they sit there with the pizza and they kind of push a little bit too much in, and it's an unpleasant process, but very cheap. Now, the pain of paying is about the timing of consumption and payment. And when we consume and pay at the same time, we feel worse about it, and therefore our enjoyment goes down. And there are lots of implications of that. By the way, we said it with credit card. Credit card take away a lot of the pain of paying. Apple Pay and Google Pay take even more of it out. So if you think that spending is a little bit out of control, if you get surprised by the end of the month by your Apple Pay and Google Pay account, it's not because you can't, not just because you can't remember, it's because they've taken out a lot of the pain of paying, and you can use other payment methods that make it more clear. You look too young, but you remember the days when people paid for electricity with a check. When people pay with
barely remember.
When people used to pay with a check, they used to also terrorize their family. You get the bill, you write the check, you get pissed off by the amount, you turn the lights off, and what's this doing, and this I told you, and so on. Now that it's automatic deduction, nobody even pays attention to what the bill is. So if you think about this first principle, is to say that payment is not really about parting with our money, it's about the attention that we pay to it. And that attention can make us want to spend more easily or less easily. And it's a big driver of our economic spending at the end of the day. Anyway, there are more examples of this, but what I mean is that we have a complex, non-rational relationship with money.
I'm curious then, because if we replace money with time,
mm-hmm.
and we start to talk about the opportunity costs for things, I would assume then that we have the same issue with time.
with time, we also don't understand our opportunity cost very well. Time is.
Is there a better way to understand?
Yeah, but time is slightly different because with time, we don't have things like savings, and we don't have interest. So time in some sense is not as of a big problem. But I'll give you an example on time. People are spending a lot of time on ads online or on social media, more than they want to, not realizing the consequence. There was one study in which people solved math problems and got paid for their performance. Let's say $4 for a math problem. I don't remember the amount, but let's say it was $4. And they asked them to put their phone on the side, and they couldn't pick it up during the hour of the experiment. And from time to time, the phone rang or buzzed. So there's either a phone call or a text message. And the question was, how much was performance going to go down on the math problems? How much money they're going to lose? And how long will it take until the performance recovered? So imagine it was you and me, and imagine that your phone was now vibrating. What was the amount of emotional capacity that you would lose, and for how long? So people in that regard usually say correctly that they would lose lots of attention when their phone rings, so the performance decreases by a lot. But they don't recognize how long it would take it to come back. In that study, it took 17 minutes to come back. Now, it didn't stay at the bottom for 17 minutes. It started going up, but it took 17 minutes to get to full recovery. Now, if you think about this is another interesting study. They just compared the situation in which people's cell phones were on the table in front of their eyes when they were working, or they were in a drawer. And even just having the phone in front of you took people's attention, right? It's a device that is a constant distraction. And when we think about it, we can't say, oh, now it's not distracting. No, we still think about all the wonderful things that could happen there. So if you think about this, these are questions about the way we spend our time. And no, we don't make good allocations of our time.
I've come across that, and where it's reminding me of is a book by Cal Newport, I believe, Deep Work, which is something that was really important. I'm not sure if you're aware of that book at all. Okay, so that book, I'm not sure his title, or in any case, it's a book on exactly what you're talking about. He called that phenomenon attention residue, I believe. Mm-hmm. I believe it was called attention residue, and it's explaining the exact same phenomenon. The fact that every time you move away from the thing that you're supposed to be doing, what you're not able to calculate is how long it takes you to get back into that flow, that actual good, part. And it's so apparent with the phone, but it's apparent in everything else as well. And achieving that flow is such a strange thing. We know it from sports. I've spoken about the times that I felt in flow while playing the sport. I mean, I feel like I'm in flow almost all the time on the field, truly, because there's no phone, there's no nothing. You don't hear the crowd, you don't hear this. You're not thinking necessarily about anything else. It's very easy to get into flow in those places. It's a controlled environment, and it's very easy to lock into what your goal is. That's harder, obviously, like you said, when you're there, when your phone's just sitting there, which I find interesting. Just the presence of it, just being there. It makes sense, even if I didn't reach for it, but it's something that you can test. And this is what my question, which is essentially going to be, are there a set of guidelines or rules that we can use to make, let's say, better decisions on everything, in general? Do you have something, does research say?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. So first of all, task switching is not a good idea, right? So here's what happened. I'll give my case. I'm trying to write something. I'm trying to describe something, and I'm stuck. Being stuck is a very unpleasant feeling. And the mind goes to saying, I'm not enjoying this, let's look for something more enjoyable. And reading the news, checking Facebook, whatever is certainly more enjoyable at the moment. And people convince themselves that they will take just a little break and come back refreshed. But there are two mistakes here. The first one is that it's not little, because these platforms are not designed to let us just spend a little bit of time. But the second thing is that they don't really refresh us. So, for example, closing your eyes and meditating or breathing or certainly refreshes people. Social media is not a refreshing activity. It's a little bit like a donut, right? It's a short-term joyful activity, but it doesn't have the long-term consequences. So people are wrong about the time they would get sucked. They're wrong about the time that it would take them to come back, and they're wrong about what refreshes us. Now, I don't think life should be suffering, right? So people shouldn't keep on doing the task the whole day that they are suffering. But if you think about some rules of productivity, the key is to define to yourself what it is that you want to do, and to start doing it first thing in the morning. So I sadly can't do it every day, but when I can, I start the morning by knowing what I want to write and writing that first thing, right? I don't say, let me just check email and then get back to this. Let me just check the news and then get back to this. You do those things, they're very tempting, but it's not a useful thing. So define to yourself what you want to do and start the day with it is incredibly helpful. I also have my coffee ritual. I like coffee. So what I do is I make myself coffee and I connect the coffee and the writing. Right. So this is what I do. But okay, so this is kind of on an individual level, right? You can think about all kinds of things like that. I have all my notifications on my phone off. The only thing that I have on is phone calls. If somebody calls me, I know, but the rest of it, I check from time to time, but I don't. There's nothing that is sufficiently urgent that if I don't check every 2 hours, I will miss something. And by the way, let's say I miss some things. How do you weigh the missing something, like, maybe there's a party that I missed, or a joke that I'm a little 2 hours late on. You miss something. How do you weigh it against the cost of constant distraction? And if people don't understand the cost of constant distraction, but the reality is that the finding from social science is that it's very hard to change people and much easier to change systems. What do I mean by change systems? Imagine we could convince Apple and Google to change the defaults on the notifications. Right? Imagine that we could convince Facebook to create some other mechanisms. Those things, if we wanted good behavioral changes, they usually come from changes in the environment, not from now. It's very hard to change the environment. So individuals, we need to think about our individual changes, but the real way to go is to think about what environmental changes we want to make.
Okay. So taking that as the hypothesis, then, if we want to change our behavior, whether that's eating the donut, like we said, checking social media, if that's the first thing I do in the morning is wake up, go to Dunkin' Donuts. I'm just trying to picture this person. It's sad, but there's probably quite a few people. I mean, they're probably having sugar and things that aren't good for their body first, and then also checking, social media, maybe something that's bad for your brain, right? So you're off to a horrible start, right, in the day, in your first 30 minutes after waking up. But to go with that understanding, you're saying the best way to change me, if I want to change or modify my behavior entirely, would be to change my environment. If I could just rip out. So I'm just trying to think of a way that I would, modify this, in a more practical sense for someone who is training or whatever.
So there's another tool that really works well for us, which is habits and rituals. If you let's say you have an approach you have now and you don't like it. You wake up and you have a donut and spend the first 2 hours of the day checking on all the amazing things that's happening on social media that you just couldn't live without. And the good news is that if you stopped it for 2 months, life will be very different. In fact, we did some studies in which we got people to stop notifications, and they had very tough 2 weeks. But after that, things got much better, right? Including quality of sleep and so on, right? So, not sleeping with the phone. I mean, there's lots of things like that. So that's number one. Is practice is on our side, but we need to practice. But the other thing about changing the environment is, how do you structure your life? So even if you, and I'm guessing you're a very healthy guy, but even if, imagine that every time you woke up, I would arrange for a tray of fresh donuts to be delivered to your house. So you opened, you got up, you got to your kitchen, and there was just a dozen fresh donuts in all flavor waiting there. I'm not saying that you would succumb every day, and I'm not saying you'll eat all 12, but let's just agree that by the end of the year you would be worse off.
Sure.
So the question is, how do we not buy donuts from the beginning? What else can we do to structure our environment? Now, if you think about sports, especially professional sports, one of the things that is really helpful is you have a coach. Somebody tells you what to do, right? It's not as if, imagine there was no coach, that every day you would wake up and you would decide how much to practice. Not as good. You have team members. They're also incredibly helpful, right? You encourage each other. There's social norms are developing. You work together. Now, it's very hard to find an individual coach, and it's very hard to do everything in team. But these are two more examples of things that help us. If you can exercise with a friend, if you can have a buddy that you report to, if you have somebody that you are accountable for, all of those things make a big difference.
The more I talk to individuals like yourself, the more I'm seeing a pattern with everyone trying to get to improve your performance, a system that will allow you to kind of skate on along without having to think, because we have habits in our lives that are, that we don't know and that we don't examine enough, whether it's
you basically
eating.
Want to do, we call this the path of least resistance.
Sure, that's where I'm going.
You want that the easier behavior is the right behavior. You want to create that situation. Now, you can't always do that, but you want to create as close to that as possible. So as a non-athlete, I'll give you an example from me in running. I discovered running. I know it doesn't need to be discovered, but I discovered running. And the reason I'm saying this is pre-COVID, I traveled a lot, about 300 days a year. I had projects all over the world. 300 days a year is a lot of traveling. And
that's a lot, yeah.
Very hard to do any exercise with that travel approach. I would get to hotels at night, the gyms would be closed, and so on. Running is easy. You need to take shoes and shorts, and basically I can land anywhere and go for a little run. The question is, how do you get into a habit of running. So it's not such a big deal. And my decision was to say, what I do is I go for 40 minutes. It doesn't matter. I walk, I run, it doesn't matter what I do, but the time is fixed. And I said, I'm not going to suffer. I'm going to listen to music or podcast. I'm going to do something fun for myself. But the time is going to fix. So I'm not like in the beginning. I said I can't run 40 minutes. There's no way I can do it. But I still say I'll run, I'll walk, I'll run, I'll walk. Now, of course, because very quickly it's easy to run 40 minutes. It's not after a few, I don't know, maybe a month or two. It's very easy to do. But I didn't start by having something that I couldn't achieve, but I started by having a time. And the reason the time is important is because you can plan on that. If I basically said, let me wait until I have X time to run, no, you want to do something that can fit in your calendar, that is, you know what you're doing, you know when it comes, and all of those things help tremendously. The calendar is an amazing tool. The calendar, I don't know about you, but I wake up in the morning, and after I do my first task, I look at the calendar and I do what I'm told.
Right.
If something is in the calendar, it gets done. If it's not in the calendar, the odds are much lower.
That's so true.
And lots of things that are important, we don't put in our calendar. When was the last time you put down, call your mother, spend time with friends, exercise? So the calendar is when we talk about the environment, the calendar is one good environment.
I think in what's interesting is I'm sitting here with a notebook also just for notes, so just on us, but it's for me to manage the time, to manage the things that I'm doing, and manage time, I guess, is a poor way of saying that. The real way of saying it is that if I don't write it down, it's not that I won't do it. I'm fairly driven. I have this mentality of wanting to do the things that I want to do. I've carved off a life where my job takes more or less an hour and a half a day. Right? I have a little bit of time leeway as opposed to an average human, but the percentage and productivity difference for when I prepare things on the paper, that there's a calendar here that says do this, and then when you follow it, you don't have to do anything after that. The task is done. If you did the good analytical thinking beforehand, where you said these are the most important things, if I can get this done, I'll be happy with myself, and then I can do whatever it is that I want to do. Go eat all the donuts in the world, right? So that alone is enough for me. And I have a really interesting question to ask you.
Before you do this, I want to go back to our discussion about opportunity cost. By writing things down, what you basically are saying is you're making a decision about opportunity. You're saying, if I don't make a plan, somebody else would make a plan for my time. It will be kidnapped by all kinds of things. And I know what is important, and I want to make sure that I do the important things and I sacrifice the unimportant. It's not as if I gave you another 10 hours of the day, you wouldn't be happy to take it, right? But the important thing is you say, okay, I have this limited amount of time. Let me make sure that the way I divide it between things that are important and non-important is according to my preference. Think about the following metaphor. You go to a supermarket, and you have a plan for how you want to spend your money and what kind of food you want to buy. But the supermarket also has a plan. And the supermarket plan is not yours. And it's not designed to maximize your long-term well-being or preferences or anything. It's designed to maximize their profits. And the question is, what tools would help you stick to your preferences? And the shopping list is one good tool where you basically say, okay, let me make it salient what is in and what is out, right? And that helps. So articulating our priority is one important way to help us make sure that we're sticking to our priorities.
This is related to exactly what you just spoke on, and maybe our last question here. There's this idea amongst certain circles, of course, that obviously focus in our society has gone down due to, or our ability to focus has gone down due to everything that we've spoken about. And this might even actually be from deep work as well. But the idea here being that we'll eventually live in a breakaway society, in the sense that there will be a good portion of Earth that cannot focus to any considerable amount of time or ability. And there will be the people who have still retained this ability. And those people with the ability to focus will be so far off the average that will live in a society of the I can focus versus the I can't focus. And, it's a bit of an extreme question, but I'm curious on two things. One, what you think the ability to focus plays in our role in making good decisions and productivity and stuff like that. And B, do you think anything like that is truly possible?
So I think focusing is incredibly important, right? It's incredibly important to spend time thinking. I think in general, it's probably fair to say that none of us are spending enough time thinking. But I told you that my discipline, behavioral economics, believes that it's much easier to change the environment than change people. And I think the solution there is also about changing the environment. And I'll give you my summer example. So I'm writing now my next book, and for the summer I rented a tiny hut in the mountains, disconnected from electricity and water. I had the well and solar power, and I spent the first 2 hours of the day hiking up the mountain and thinking about what I want to write. And when I got to the top, I had my laptop and I would write for 2 hours, and I would walk back. But it was really an interesting process, because usually when I plan what I want to write, I think about what I want to write and then I write it. But here I had 2 hours. So let's say after 30 minutes, I figured out what I'm going to write. I couldn't stop and write. I had to wait to get to the top, but I kept on thinking about it. So the 2 hour was a really interesting mechanism that forced me to keep on thinking, even if I thought that I have an answer, right? So after 30 minutes of thinking, I said, okay, I know how I'm going to describe this. But then I kept on going, and I discovered better ways and improvements and so on. And I think, by the way, there's another fascinating paper showing that we're also more creative while exercising. And not just while they're exercising, it stays long after that. So something about probably metabolism and so on is very helpful. So I think there are ways. By the way, for me personally, I tried it also on mountain biking a couple of days. I couldn't focus. I was too focused on the bike, and the scenery was I was too captured by the scenery. I couldn't focus to the same degree. But maybe people who are good cyclists could do it differently. But anyway, the point is, I think we need to find out our focus zones and our methods, and that's a task for us. But do it not in these people can and these people can't, but basically figure out a way for each of us to have the mind space and the environment that could facilitate that. So, frankly, if I could do a 2 hour walk every day, it would have been great. This was just the last month, but it made me realize this is a very good method for me. I think we all need to find out the methods that allow us to think and focus. And when I'm on my phone, I'll be on the flight later today. I'll be in the airport. I'm sure I'll check social media and be just as distracted as everybody else. But we need to figure out mechanisms in our own lives to get us to achieve things at a higher level.
Right. I mean, I'll 100% agree with that. Definitely, there's this weird phenomenon there where everyone knows a time where they feel like they say that they can't stop, say that they can't think about a problem. They're rushed. They're all this stuff, and the world is around them. And then, if for whatever reason, whether it's an injury or something, whatever it is that happens, their car breaks down and they're stuck there with just themselves. The amount of things that get solved, the amount of insights that happen, it's a cure, or it's a pure look into what I think needs to happen, and it's just you have to stop. You have to stop. You have to think. You have to let that process actually happen and create an environment for it. Is probably one way of doing it. I love to meditate myself.
I can't.
And that took a whole long time.
I can't meditate.
You can't, huh?
I can't.
Some people can't.
I start meditating and I only think about my to-do list, and I end up being more stressed than I started. And I know that if I kept going for a while, it probably would get better.
There it is.
I just can't.
Let's get maybe that 2-hour meditation. That's it. 2-hour meditation, then a 2-hour walk up to the top of the mountain.
Very good. I promised to give a talk to a group in Pakistan, so I have to run.
Yes, go for it. Go for it. Yes.
Pleasure meeting you.
Hopefully they're staying safe. You as well. We'll link to everything right down below, guys. Thanks a lot, Dan. We'll have to do this again sometime.
Anytime, with pleasure. Take care.